Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
What did I say when Montreal moved on and beat Toronto? I was like, they're going to run into a tough time with Edmonton or with Winnipeg.
About that.
About that. Who knows anything anymore? What matters? Who knows what? Nothing. No one can predict anything. It's all just hot air. Kudos.
The fact that anyone listens to us at this point is mind-boggling.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean,
Montreal they have run into the absolute perfect storm. A mediocre team squeezes into the playoffs, plays a team with a history of choking in the first round, runs into a team missing their star player for reasons, and a team, Winnipeg just looks bad. Like, bad. And Montreal is probably going to be going to the conference finals, which, hey, in the long run is a good thing. Because, again, I'm still on record. I don't think Montreal is that good. But the longer they keep Ducharme and Bergevin around, the better it is for the rest of the division.
Well, I want to say, like, Godspeed to the Canadiens when they reach the conference finals. Because if that's the Avalanche, that's going to be one hell of a tough challenge. But
winner of Winnipeg, Montreal plays winner of Colorado, Vegas. Like, the way the seeding worked out, that you can already pencil it in.
I mean, even if it's Vegas, that is an incredibly tough draw. Like, Vegas is one of the best teams in the league, but the Avalanche are, I think, on a different level. If the Avalanche pull it together and win the series, like, that's going to be an extremely tough draw. And again, I would love to say, oh yeah, Avs in 3, ha ha ha, but we just know Montreal's going to go out there and steal 2 games.
And that is the Nordiques versus the Canadiens. There's been crazy things to happen between them before. So, who is it? Down Goes Brown pointed out, we're very close. Well, Carolina's kind of screwing it up. We're very close to having an all Adams division Final Four with the the Montreal Canadiens, the Quebec Nordiques, the Hartford Whalers, and the Boston Bruins. We're like right there, but Tampa and their extra $17 million are screwing it up.
Well, I mean, that would be fun, but Tampa not screwing it up, or like Tampa screwing it up by not screwing up their own series actually does help Detroit by 1 additional pick.
It's going to be crazy in terms of the Red Wings pick that 3 of the 4 divisions went in the exact and only ways possible to maximize Detroit's pick. The only 2 teams that didn't help Detroit were Colorado and Vegas. Everybody else that moved on, I think, assuming Tampa wins, bumped Detroit up in the first round, which is just incredible to think about. The long odds for this to happen.
Absolutely wild.
Now, that being said, with my disdain for the Lightning outweighs what I think 1 spot in the draft is worth. So I am still rooting for the Hartford Whalers to come back and win the next 3 games, but I'm not confident in that.
All right. The Winged Wheel Podcast. Welcome. I'm Ryan Hanna.
I'm mostly Brad Crisco. And
I'm Evan. I was going to say something else, but I can't break from brand. It was going to be like I'm the worst golfer imaginable, but I won't bore people with those details.
You know what, Evan? Like, well and truly piss off with that. Because if you were going to make us, 75 to 90 minutes late for this podcast, the least you could have done was shot a good round.
Today I thought maybe I was right-handed. And for all those who don't know, I'm a left-handed golfer. That's how bad it was out there. Like, I don't know. I need like a week off. I need to finish half a cheesecake. I don't know. I don't know what it's all about.
I don't have cheesecake, and you're rubbing that in too.
Did you guys, since we're on the topic of golf, did you guys see what happened to John Rahm yesterday?
Yeah.
He lost $1.6 million or something like that because of a positive COVID test.
So he had an ace the day before and was on an absolute heater. I think he was leading by 4 or 6 at the time.
6.
And they let him finish the entire round and then told him he had COVID and had to withdraw.
Wait, they let him finish they knew before the end of his round what? How?
Yeah.
What?
I don't know.
What if he gave it to his caddy or a span? Or I know outdoors it's long odds, but still.
I have no idea how that happened or why they wouldn't just let him play the course by himself tomorrow. Like, whatever. Like, we all know that conversation. But yeah, crazy. So if he would have won that tournament, I think the first place prize was $1.675 million.
Oh my God.
Between that and the Brooksy DeChambeau stuff going on, golf has so much drama. Evan, you were close to being able to do a spin-off podcast.
It's true. This is the craziest golf has been in a long time.
To be fair, I think $1.6 million is how much I lost by selling my AMC shares at $19. So,
yeah, I think you're right.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast, we have a lot to talk about. We'll be chatting more about the Red Wings' 6th overall pick and what might come of that, as well as, like we mentioned earlier, some movement potentially on the second first round pick that the Red Wings own from the Washington Capitals. We have an interview with Catherine Silverman. We promised you that with the goalie discussion surrounding Jesper Wallstedt, we'd bring in some pros, and this is the beginning of that. So we had a great conversation with Kat last yesterday morning, and we got some really good insights from it. Really pumped for you to hear it. Some updates from around the NHL playoffs, and then international hockey as well, before jumping into our draft profile and overtime. But first, very quickly, I do want to acknowledge the Jamie Daniels Foundation, a children's foundation initiative that was established in memory of Jamie Daniels and founded by Jamie's father, who you'll know as Red Wings lead announcer Ken Daniels, and Jamie's mother, Lisa Daniels Goldman. They strive to end the stigma of substance use disorder and provide support to those struggling with the disease or who are in recovery. To support them and learn more, visit jamiedanielsfoundation.org, an organization we're very proud to partner with on this podcast. All right. The Red Wings are getting some help from the Tampa Bay Lightning, which feels dirty, but if they beat the Carolina Hurricanes, which it looks like they are poised to do as long as they close out the series, Detroit will reach the maximum possible remaining upward movement, I guess, of the Washington first round pick. So it goes up to 23rd officially in the standings, which is effectively the 22nd pick because the Arizona Coyotes are cheaters that got caught. Which is now, great news.
One small thing that I would like to do between now and the draft, just for sake, I think we all know by now Arizona's forfeited their pick, so we can just call it the 23rd pick and everybody will understand. Yes? Can we all agree on that?
From now on, we'll call it what it is on the board.
The 23rd pick, but understand we will be getting the 22nd player in the draft. Just for the NHL is going to call it the 23rd pick, so it's just going to be easier if us and everybody, when discussing it, calls it the 23rd pick, which is crazy because that pick, even if Washington did not make the Final Four, could have still been like 26 or 27.
Yeah, there's a lot of range on this, and you could have argued, if Washington finished lower in the regular season standings, then it could have been even better. But yeah, sure, whatever. This is pretty close to the best possible scenario entering the playoffs that the Red Wings had for this pick.
What was the absolute... Okay, did Minnesota finish ahead of Washington in the regular season or no?
No, I don't think so. I can look for you right now.
Okay, so then the best this pick could have been was 21.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. It got that close. And the only two teams, assuming Tampa holds on, that did not bump Detroit's pick up a spot was Colorado and Vegas. Like, that's insane for everything else to go the way it did. Now, Boston and the Islanders and Tampa winning is not crazy. Montreal and Winnipeg, you could argue, is. But, overall, the way it's shaken down has literally been almost best case Ontario.
What Minnesota did finish lower. So yeah, you're right there. Yeah, this is fantastic news. I was honestly expecting something like pick 26 to 28. And I would have been perfectly happy with that. The 22nd player off the board is massive. Like 23rd overall is huge. That's 9 picks before the end of the round. You're getting into players that you liked in the 10 to 14 range. At least one of them will probably be available there. Like, that is this draft is a little funny for sure. I think you get less wonky once you get out of the top 10. I think it's a little bit more normal in terms of what you can expect, but the Red Wings are going to have an opportunity to, I honestly think like this is a year where the Red Wings can draft a relatively speaking top 10 talent, or they have a good chance to with that second first round pick, depending on who slips, who's under scouted because of the pandemic, all those external factors. It's a prime opportunity.
It's funny you mentioned that because I forgot to mention that I not finalized, but like I've officially got my draft rankings set right now, up until pick 49. But I really hammered down in the first round on breaking it into tiers, and I've got a 6-player tier at the top, a second tier, which is 6 players, a third tier, which is 8 players. So that takes us to 20. And I will bet money that 3 or 4 of those players from my third tier will be available at the 23rd pick, which is just making me so happy.
Okay. There's going to be no shortage of conversation on what to do with the 6th pick, but a fun little theory that popped up, stemming mostly from Vancouver, and much like previous seasons, Jim Benning is going to provide teams from across the NHL a lot of reasons to speculate. But it was said that Vancouver is looking for help on the right side on defense. That's a team that has its core players in a competitive window right now. So they can't afford a full-on rebuild. They can't really afford to start halfway through a rebuild. They have to find a way to, Ken Holland's smiling somewhere as I say this, retool on the fly. God. What does Vancouver have? The 9th overall pick? They have the 9th overall pick. Yeah. Is there a conversation here, and this is from Nick, is there a conversation here to trade Filip Hronek in exchange for the contract of Louis Eriksson and the 9th overall pick? I think that was the trade.
Is there a conversation to be had? Of course there is. Would Vancouver do it? Almost certainly not. The only reason I say I don't say 100% Vancouver wouldn't do it is because Jim Benning. He's made a lot of questionable decisions, so I'm not throwing it out of range. Now there's 2 things working against Detroit here in terms of this hypothetical trade. One, that 9th overall pick is very, very valuable. And I don't think even adding the anchor of Louis Eriksson's contract, which I think only has 1 year left at this point anyway, but they do need to move it. They are in cap hell. I don't think that's enough to make it worth it for the Canucks. And 2, Filip Hronek's coming off a very subpar season. So if we had the same mentality about Filip Hronek right now as the league did last summer after his breakout season, it's probably a little more likely to happen. But not that Hronek had a bad year. He had an acceptable year, but the hype train has cooled, which means that so does trade value. And at the 9th overall pick, there is a solid chance, not 100% chance, but a solid chance that, Brent Clark, Luke Hughes, Simon Edvinsson, one of them sitting there. I wouldn't bet on it, but it's not crazy to think that could happen. And if Vancouver's in need of a defenseman, why would they not just take one? And that's not even to say too, there could be defensemen behind those guys that they're huge on, because you don't have to go crazy far down the list to get to the Carson Lamboses of the world. So maybe they're big on Corson Kuhlmans. I don't know. I'm just saying, it makes sense theoretically. I just don't think the values add up. So I don't know what else Vancouver needs off the top of my head, but I know depth scoring is always an issue for them. So if we throw in hypothetically a Robbie Fabry, maybe that gets it done. Because Vancouver's in win now mode. So the fact that Fabry's a little older probably doesn't sway them, but there would have to be a sweetener from Detroit's end. I just don't know what the right value is there.
Yeah. So for me, it's not so much about that specific trade, which I actually think is a super interesting proposal for what it's worth. It's the idea of one prying away a really good pick from a team that might be in a bind. Jim Benning is going to be fighting for his job here. Well, actually, he is fighting for his job. He nearly lost it this summer. Vancouver really needs to find a way to get back into a competitive window with the core that they have before they're in somehow more cap held than they are now. And this is stemming from a conversation I had with Adam Lascaris earlier. Yzerman has an incentive here to, and don't get mad at me for suggesting this, move the window back even more for the rebuild, specifically for these next two drafts. If this year's an aberration and Detroit drops back down to the standings once we get normal divisions again, then, this is all a moot point. But if Detroit is hovering around 6th to 9th or worse lottery odds this year or next year and the season after that, is it out of your ultimate control? Sure. But are you missing out on two prime opportunities to land possible franchise talents in either Wright or Bedard and Michkov? Yeah. And, Yzerman's gone on record to say how valuable winning a draft lottery is to your franchise. So you shift back your window even further by moving Hronek. You open up space to draft a right-handed defenseman with that pick. You make the team a little bit worse for the next two seasons and up your lottery odds. It would be a net gain to move a strong asset. I could see opportunities for moving a strong asset now being a net gain for future years. It's a little bit galaxy brained, and I know it's going to piss some people off because the rebuild's been long enough, but that's just kind of that's the thinking it spurned for me.
Well, Hronek's going to turn 24 just after the season starts, so I think 3 years is the number that most people tend to agree on, or at least pretty close to in times of turnaround on this rebuild now. That puts Hronek at 27, so if the Red Wings can contend pretty quickly after getting into the playoffs, kind of like Chicago did, then you probably want to keep Hronek because he'll still be at a very valuable age where he'll be very productive still, and he'll be near his peak. If there's any possibility it takes longer than that, then yeah, it's going to be wasted years of Hronek. I don't know if Hronek's old enough yet that he's the guy I take that mentality with, though. I think he's still plenty young enough that I don't really consider him to be an older asset. Yeah. I know that's not what you're saying. On another topic, though, I think I've kind of trended towards let's see what we can get for Bertuzzi now, but that's another conversation, because it went so well with Mantha. But, there's definitely something we've been saying for 2 years now, that there's something to be done between Vancouver and Detroit, because Detroit's had a flush of cap space. Vancouver's had tons of picks and prospects. They've been in cap hell the whole time. I remember us proposing trades that involved Andreas Athanasiou. So this is not new. But yeah, I'll summarize by saying I'll be shocked if it involves the 9th overall pick. I think a 2022 pick is more likely, and I would also say that's more valuable. Even though I don't think Vancouver's going to bottom out quite as hard as everybody thinks, but I don't see them being a playoff team, so it's another ball in the hopper for whatever that's worth. But keep in mind, this is with the new draft lottery rules next year. So I think next season, Vancouver's a fringe playoff team because they don't play in a great division. Almost have to jog my memory what the hell that division looks like, which means Vancouver could win the lottery, but still doesn't end up with the Shane Wright or Brad Lambert picks. So it's worth keeping that in the back of your mind, but still, even if they jump from 14 to 4, it's still better than taking 9th overall this year. But then the other reality is it's just pick 14, which isn't a bad thing. But they play in a shitty division, so that could be pick 21. It's a lot of hypotheticals to run through, and it's all worth factoring in, but it's me humoring something that I don't think is going to happen ultimately.
That's what we do, though, on this podcast.
Yes, and that's why I entertained it.
Or it will happen 15 minutes after Ryan goes to edit and post.
Oh. dude.
And then Ryan will call us frantically saying we need to have an emergency podcast. And I'm like, sorry, man, I'm out on the golf course again.
Oh, is that what... Are we doing real today? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with both of you. Like, I don't know. I just find it very hard for a team to trade away a top 10 pick unless they're getting a king's ransom back. But if there's anybody you could probably swindle, it's Jim Benning. So
yeah,
obviously there'll be conversations had, just like there's always conversations about the first overall pick, whether that's true or not. But something coming to fruition takes a lot more than just talking about it. So could it happen? Yeah, totally. From all the reasons you guys just listed, but I don't know. It just seems really unlikely to me.
And it is worth noting that Vancouver has been one of the very few teams in the league to be involved in the last 10 years in a trade where a top 10 pick was moved, except they were receiving the 9th overall pick when they traded Corey Schneider, and they would know that worked out very well for them because with that pick, they took their current captain, Bo Horvat. So if anybody knows the value of trading for a top 10 pick, it's the Canucks.
All right, I am going to wrap this point up because I think it's high time that we stop trying to speculate about what Jim Benning is going to do with his time and start listening to someone who knows a lot about something that's useful to this podcast, which is goaltending and the merits of drafting a goaltender high, what it's like to scout a goaltender and develop a goaltender. So Cat Silverman gave us a lot of great insights. It's fun to hear the nuanced and difficult conversation that is goaltending. So we really hope you enjoyed the interview. Right now, Cat Silverman. So we have a habit on this pod of always saying, or calling out when we don't exactly know the most about whatever we're talking about. In the theme of that for the last little while has been goalies. So much to Brad's dismay, we have decided to bring on some goalie experts. We are joined by Catherine Silverman. Kat is from In Goal Magazine, 3 Cheers for Goaltender Interference podcast, and one of the best follows on Twitter, especially related to everything netminders. Kat, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before I throw to Evan to start us off, I would just like to note, Brad has been the biggest proponent for not drafting a goalie 6th overall and has shot down Jesper Wallstedt more firmly than Evan and I. So I just want you to have that pretext before getting into this interview. All right,
where's
Evan,
that bus that you just threw me under?
It kept driving.
Yeah.
So I have one question, and I have to leave very soon, so I need to know the answer. In your Twitter bio, it says, hot dog enthusiast. What goes on a hot dog? That's all I need to know.
Oh. I don't want to make anyone angry, but it's ketchup and mustard.
Okay. We can continue
like one little stripe of each.
Yeah, like the cartoon, right?
Like a cartoon, exactly.
Yeah.
You played to both bases. That's a good answer.
Not making anyone angry is not really the MO of this podcast. So you're already coming out ahead of all 3 hosts here.
Good.
So on the theme of goaltending and us not knowing exactly, what goes into it, we've always found that scouting goaltenders specifically is extremely difficult. And maybe describing what qualities to look for, we don't have the same depth of knowledge or granularity as we do with skaters. What are some things that the average hockey fan who maybe doesn't know the intricacies of the position can look for when scouting a goalie?
That's tough because a lot of times it's not just the lack of info that we have on what makes a good goaltender. It's the variance, especially when we're scouting in reference to the draft. We have a lot of guys who play in Russia and play at the KHL level or play at the MHL level. And then we have guys who play in Sweden. I know we have one in particular you guys mentioned we might talk about. But even within Sweden, Finland, there's multiple levels that they play at, not just because they're not as good, but because there aren't the available spots. And then in North America, you can't play in the major juniors if you want to play college, and you can't play overseas if you don't have the right transfer agreement. And so a lot of these guys are playing behind vastly different skill sets and behind vastly different talent levels. And so it's kind of tricky to sort of look at it as, they need to do this, or they need to be able to stop this, because a lot of them won't face the same types of shots and the same quality of defense. But usually looking for progression and consistency from game to game when you're watching a goaltender from a drafting perspective and looking at numbers consistency. You know, if a guy's putting up an 890 save percentage over in the SHL somewhere, not always a sign that he's terrible. Could be a sign that he plays for a team that really needs to drop from the SHL down to Hockey Allsvenskan. But if he's putting up consistent numbers and they're getting a little bit better as he goes along, or his goals against average is much lower than some of the other guys who have a similar save percentage within the same league, then chances are his numbers are kind of betraying him a little bit. And when it comes to actually watching those goaltenders, if it looks like they're making new and unique mistakes during every game, you know, you see them make a really, really wild diving save and just totally miss the puck in one game. And then the next game, it looks like they're just not getting on angle. You know, they're facing one direction and the puck crosses the center line and comes in behind them. That's usually a sign that there's a little bit of consistency work that needs to be done there. But it's tough. It really is. Even, I think it's probably the number one position for just admittance that we don't really have a secure set of parameters for what makes a goaltender really look like they're going to make it in the long run.
Well, that's almost a perfect segue into the grand conversation we've been having on this podcast for a while now, which is drafting philosophy with goalies, because this is the third year in a row the Red Wings' first round pick is going to be the center of the goalie mock drafts. It was Knight a couple of years ago, Askarov last year. Now we're having all the same conversations with Wallstedt. But just in the big picture with philosophy, because you mentioned that from league to league, team to team, there's a lot of variance and a lot of factors that go into goalie, which to me leads to believe that you can't always fully trust where or what you're getting when you draft a goalie, especially at such a young age. So, you know, some people say just grab the best goalies you can as high as you can and hope it works out. Other people say don't draft a goalie too late because, like you said, it could be a goalie with an 850 save percentage and a 4 GAA, but he's playing behind a garbage team and he ends up being a home run. So in terms of overall philosophy in drafting goalies, where do you fall on the spectrum?
Not to pander to both sides, but I think it depends a lot on the available scouting talent within the team and on what sort of goaltending development system they have. Like, I feel a lot more confident that if, for example, the Columbus Blue Jackets draft a guy a little bit higher, or the New York Rangers, the New York Islanders, these guys that have Mitch Korn, Benoit Allaire, with the Blue Jackets, excuse me, it's a little unique because it's not necessarily their goaltending coaching, it's their scouting. They have some really good scouts in place. They actually, they have Nicholas Backstrom of the former Minnesota Wild goaltender, actually has been helping them scout and at least oversee some of their goaltending over in Europe over the last few years. So teams like that, I'm a little more confident if they do draft higher that, okay, the guys who are drafting are in constant communication with someone who, number one, knows what they're looking at, and number two, has a pretty clear picture of how they're going to fit into the team's hierarchical structure. Then there are a couple other teams who I won't necessarily throw under the bus on the podcast, but I think the podcast covers one of them every episode, that their scouting, their scouting system's a little bit less clear. And some of the guys that these teams have drafted over the years have been a little bit of an eyebrow raiser. Like, for example, I know Detroit at the 2018 draft drafted a couple overage goalies who looked like they were going to be pretty immediately ready to play pro, but looked like their ceiling wasn't very high. And so it's a little harder to be confident that a team like that is going to necessarily find the right goaltender, like a Spencer Knight versus, with no disrespect to Jack Campbell, versus a Jack Campbell who needed to have a complete change of scenery, intensive game restructuring, and like an absurd amount of patience to get him to the point where he was someone who looked like he was supposed to be a high first round draft pick.
So that's really interesting to hear because I think that tracks a lot with what Red Wings fans know to be Detroit's draft strategy, which is just throw a couple of darts every draft and one's bound to hit. And, you know, we've kind of accepted that for a long time. And that's probably a little bit cheap and lazy because it's more just, you know, capitulating to the amount of uncertainty there is around goalies. And unless you're one of those teams that you named that has like a really robust scouting or development program or both, I guess you just have to deal with that level of uncertainty. The only thing in my mind that would make it then worth it to take a risk on the goalie in the top 10 is how certain are you about this guy? How above and beyond, how head and shoulders above the rest is Jesper Wallstedt? So putting you on the spot, Kat, how much does Wallstedt stand out among the crowd where if you were, you know, the GM for a team that was very average in terms of drafting goaltenders, how comfortable would you feel taking him?
Not super comfortable. Just because we look at the variance in these teams that don't draft goaltenders super well, and not to put the Red Wings on the spot, I'll sort of throw it over to the Western Conference. I think the Edmonton Oilers are a perfect example of a team that whatever break in the chain of communication and scouting they have, their goaltending strategy over the last 3 years has been Mike Smith, which is a super fascinating choice, and not in a super good way. And then their drafting of goalies hasn't been super strong, and the environment for their developing goalies hasn't been super strong. So they have guys like Stuart Skinner, who just seems to be stalling out a little bit. Laurent Brossoit, when he was with them, seems to stall out pretty heavily and had to once again have that change of scenery. So a team like that, I'd say you can have a Spencer Knight, and I still wouldn't be super confident that he'd thrive there. I don't think that's necessarily the case with Detroit because they do seem to have, at the pro level at least, a pretty robust coaching department, right? They seem to have at least a good enough department that they haven't taken massive steps backwards, other than the fact that they went from having, for the Red Wings, a generationally sound goaltender in Jimmy Howard to having guys who are kind of placeholders right now, which is not to insult Jonathan Bernier in any way. But no, I think the Red Wings, I don't think they'd shoot themselves in the foot doing something like that, you know, drafting a guy like Jesper Wallstedt, but it's not necessarily the team that I think is the best primed to make that kind of pick, per se.
So when we were doing a live stream for the draft lottery, and we had one of our friends on, Prashant Iyer, to guest host with us on that. And one of the objections I have personally with the goalie in the top 10 isn't just about the variance and the risk associated with drafting a goalie in the first round, but also the development and the cap implications long term. But without getting into the weeds on that, one point he brought up, though, that I thought was super interesting is he thinks teams lose value when they draft a goalie because they let them sit for way too long before they bring him in. And by the time they're in the league, they're 23, 24, 25 years old. They're already on their second, possibly third contract. You have not wasted, but you've had them for 6-7 years and got no value out of them at the NHL level. Now you look at what Florida's doing with Spencer Knight. He's playing critical games. They only drafted him a couple of years ago. Do you need a special goalie to be able to hop into the lineup in 2 or 3 years? Or is this just an overarching problem in the NHL of teams sitting on promising young goalies for way too long?
I think it's a little bit of both. Number one, I think it does take a special goalie to get drafted in 2018, 2019, and then essentially make their NHL debut within a 2-year window. I think that's not a thing that, number one, would happen very often, and number two, should. But we do see goaltenders sit a little longer than maybe they should at the AHL level, because of the availability of spots. But teams still need to sign those guys at the AHL level anyway, right? And so if you don't draft the goalies, sometimes there's available talent left in the free agent market for sure. I think that's going to be going away, though, as time goes on and teams start actually hiring goaltending scouts. There are still teams that don't, which I think is crazy, but there are teams that truly do throw darts at the wall and say, oh, hopefully this guy's good. And then there are ones who have multiple goaltending scouts specifically on their payroll and are actually finding guys who, like, I think the Arizona Coyotes have done a pretty solid job with that. Aiden Hill got drafted, and I think it was 2014, something like that, 2014, 2013, started making NHL appearances within, I think it was 2 years of making it to the AHL, and only limited appearances, but has been growing in those. Ivan Prosvetov should be doing the same thing here in the next year or two. They haven't had a ton of those outright misses, just because they have 2 goaltending scouts, one of them that works overall and one of them that works specifically in Europe. And then they have both a development and an NHL goalie coach who work with their scouting department and say, this is the system we've been running. This is what will work. This is what won't work. These are the types of guys we would need. See if you can find us some. And as teams start to do that, start to hire those scouts, it's going to be harder to find those good goaltenders on the free agent market without overpaying for them. And I think that that's going to be where teams will start to lose value if they really dig in their heels and say, well, we can find them when they become good. It'll be fine. They won't find them when they become good, because they're going to go to the teams that have done their due diligence ahead of time and given those guys a chance to develop where they can see them. Because there is some benefit to having these guys develop in the AHL rather than in Europe, because they're playing within the same system that they'll be playing in, hypothetically, when they do reach the NHL with a team.
So that actually pretty much answered my next question, which was going to be about the, develop a franchise goalie, running the risk of having to pay him big bucks later, as opposed to finding a cheaper solution on the market. So you see that as a waning window. Like, that's something that's just a result of, an inefficiency, so to speak, in how teams scout and draft goalies. So you think that'll go away in the next however long?
Yeah, I think we're already getting closer to it with a few notable outliers. Obviously, I think nobody's defending the Sergei Bobrovsky contract as being a home run for the team that signed it. But once again, with the Coyotes, they've had Antti Ranta and Darcy Kemper under contract for, I think it's about $3 million per. And that's 2 guys who had .920 save percentages, more or less, over the last 3 to 4 years with the team. We have teams like, I think that the New York Islanders did a fantastic job signing Semyon Varlamov to $4 million per, something like that. The Blackhawks did it with Robin Lehner when they signed him for a $4 million deal. We're seeing it more and more. And part of it was almost that teams were treating goaltenders like baseball treats pitchers, where they don't get paid until they've more than proven themselves. And then it's almost like they got apology contracts. Like, we underpaid you for 4 years. Here, take our money now. And I think that's an inefficient way to sign athletes. But I think it is starting to level out a little bit there. But I also, on the other hand, I do think that goaltenders should be making a little bit more money, because they have been a little bit underpaid just based on the uncertainty of teams not knowing how to pick out which guys are going to last long term. And so they do underpay a lot of goaltenders until they randomly overpay guys. So yeah, I think it's I certainly won't advocate for paying them less. I think they should all make millions of dollars, but No, I think we're going to stop seeing teams signing bizarrely high contracts to guys who are past their prime, and then bizarrely low contracts to guys who really they should have locked up earlier.
So I think it's worth noting, in all transparency here, one of the big talking points surrounding drafting a goalie so high is if you're drafting them that high, they're going to be, or you would want them to be, a phenom goalie for you, a top 10 goalie in the league, at which point the comparisons that are drawn in are the Vasilevskys, the Price, the Bobrovsky contracts. And so what you're saying is maybe not straw man, but those are more outliers now, in that with this tapering off of or leveling out of goalie contracts, it maybe shouldn't be so much of a fear, their second or third contract with the team. So you have a bigger window having that goalie as your franchise goaltender and a starting goalie for the team without crushing your cap.
Yeah, I think it shouldn't be. There's also this weird division of money within the salary cap. I think that a lot of teams for a while weren't leaving, a lot of money for goaltenders, which I find super strange because we've seen what happens to teams who don't have not even good goaltending, but consistent goaltending. We look at what happened with Mike Smith over the 2 years prior to this one. We look at what happened with the San Jose Sharks. They banked on Martin Jones figuring it out year after year after year. But yeah, we see these teams that don't get consistent goaltending, and it doesn't work out for them. And they're teams that tried to cut corners with costs. They said, "Oh, we'll just go with Martin Jones, or we'll deal away Marc-Andre Fleury and then not have a solid replacement for him." And I think that does hurt teams a little bit, especially when they see not as much with the Penguins there, but teams that lose guys in free agency because they weren't willing to pay them more. And I think that what happened with Vancouver, where they lost Jacob Markstrom, who could have been a very solid tandem with Thatcher Demko for another year or two there, that's a perfect example. Teams were underpaying guys for so long that some of them said, well, fine, I'm going to go where they'll overpay me a little bit, and intentionally lost out on talent by doing that too.
For the record, that wasn't my background. I was actually researching something on the Penguins this morning. So I was just like, oh, speaking of teams that got undone by goaltending. But no, because contract structure for goalies has been really fascinating to me, because generally, from what I've noticed, goalies tend to get bridge contracts more than players do, even though it's becoming far more the norm with players. But when you look at some of the best goalie contracts in the league, it was off of teams that took, I don't want to say risks, but essentially took risks and signed their guy long term before he was fully proven. And you look at two of the best overall contracts in the NHL right now in my mind are Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg and John Gibson in Anaheim, who signed for about $6 million each, give or take, long term when they were still fairly unproven. Do we know enough about goalies, generally speaking? I know it's a case by case basis, to be able to take those kind of gambles with more frequency? And maybe do we start see teams doing that, going, so hypothetically, the Red Wings draft Wallstedt, they have him for a few years and they're like, yeah, this is our guy. We're going to sign him 7x7. Now get it out of the way. We don't want to pay him $11 million down the road. Should teams be doing that more than they are, or is the risk still too great and you'd still take the bridge approach for most of these guys?
In theory, yeah, I'd start taking the risk with more of them, but I think teams have to have a consistent play management structure in place before they're willing to do that. Because that's I think what saved both Anaheim and Winnipeg there is, especially with Anaheim, they brought in Ryan Miller, who obviously over the final years that he was there wasn't able to handle as many of the games, but did manage to handle big chunks of the workload for an unfortunately very injury prone John Gibson for a while there. We saw kind of the same thing with Colorado did it with Semyon Varlamov, and they had Calvin Pickard do it. Now they have Philip Grubauer, and unfortunately the guy that they banked on to help them manage that workload for Grubauer ended up getting hurt and didn't play the entire season. But, you know, teams are trying to do that for the most part. But I think Toronto is a perfect example of a team that, even if they had signed the most team-friendly contract in the world for Frederik Andersen, which I would argue he has a pretty team-friendly contract, they didn't manage the workload. And that's almost what you see burn a team more than anything else, is they overwork a goaltender who then doesn't really get a chance to rest properly, doesn't get a chance to develop properly, and then they either get injured or they start letting bad habits creep back in. The Penguins with Matt Murray, I think they did him a major disservice there. And then Ottawa signed him to a contract based off of, I think, hopes and dreams. And I think you have to have that commitment to giving the goaltender proper workload management in order to sign that contract from an early age, you know, to do the John Gibson or the Connor Hellebuyck kind of pay structure. But if teams can figure out how to do that, can figure out how to actually have two goaltenders that they can convince their head coach to trust, I think that's a very reasonable way to start at least looking at the pay structure moving forward.
So one question to close out here, Kat. I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, what would you do if you were Steve Yzerman, but, which I have a habit of doing. Let's say the Red Wings do draft Wallstedt. What kind of advice would you give to Red Wings fans in terms of what they can expect in terms of a timeline, you know, measures for success? What does this look like for a good 6 overall pick panning out for the Red Wings?
So for starters, if I was Steve Yzerman, I would have looked at that goaltending draft class last year and taken advantage of it, which he didn't.
Wow.
So I think that already kind of shot himself in the foot there. But I don't know. I think the Red Wings they'd probably thrive drafting Wallstedt, and I think they could probably bring him over fairly quickly, not immediately, but more than anything, I think they have so many other holes in their lineup right now, and I don't love the goaltending pool that they have to work with overall. So I don't know if that's necessarily the guy that I would draft for them, unless they really commit to adding more around him too. Not just adding more around him on defense and whatnot, but within their goaltending depth chart, because that's not a team whose depth chart I'm enamored with. And I think if you bring in a guy like Wallstedt and don't have a supporting cast around him in terms of backup and other guys in the AHL to learn from and to share the workload with, you essentially diminish your own value there. It's like buying a Lamborghini and opting not to change the oil.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, that is incredibly interesting and very insightful. And I would love to have said that you signed and sealed this discussion, and you, but no, seriously, you gave us a lot of really quality information on this. Brad, any final notes before we wrap up here?
I'm just happy that for the most part, the person who knows way more about goaltending than I is roughly on the same page as me, so I'll take it as a good day.
Kat, we were friends to start, but now you've put Brad in a good mood, which is something we're not fans of doing on this podcast. So, no, seriously. Cat Silverman, guys, at Cat M Silverman on Twitter. Go give her a follow, In Goal Magazine and 3 Cheers for Goaltender Interference podcast. Cat, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Okay, hope you guys enjoyed that interview, and I hope you either learned something or got a lot more confused about what Detroit should do with their 6th overall pick. At certain points in the interview, I was either swayed one way or the other before finally landing on this is a complicated, nuanced topic, and I don't pretend to think that it's black and white. So it's nice to know that there isn't an easy answer to it.
my two big takeaways from that 20, 30-minute interview. Three takeaways. One, I really wish we recorded the entire 2 hours we were talking with her because, she had some grade A stories about her children. Two, she brought up so many points that hadn't even been considered yet. Like, who pieces together, well, yeah, if a team's really good at developing goalies, of course they should take a goalie. Is Detroit good at developing goalies? Track record says no. And three, I bet going into that interview that 90% of you didn't think the goalie expert would side with me.
I don't know.
Not completely side, but when it came push to shove, would you take him at 6? The answer is probably not. I'm counting that as a win.
So what it falls on is, are you good at scouting goalies? Which for Detroit, obviously the answer here seems to be no. They haven't really had a good one since up through the draft since Mrazek, that's turned into a regular NHLer. And two, are you good at creating a system, a pro system for goalies to thrive? And I think the answer for that is yes. Jimmy Howard was good as long as Jimmy Howard was athletically able. Jonathan Bernier is good right now, and Jonathan Bernier was not always this good in his career. I think there is something to be said about the way Detroit supports its goalies at the pro level.
I'm not even going to say the pro level. I'm going to get more specific and say the NHL level, because what the current goaltending coaches did to Jonathan Bernier's career is wonderful, and they seem to turn Thomas Greiss around in a pretty big hurry this year, and Jimmy Howard was great forever. Philip Larson struggled in the AHL. They can't seem to keep a goalie there. Caden Fulcher hasn't really progressed at all. I mean, everything below, though. It could be both. It honestly could be both. It could be one or the other, but getting to Kat's point, it doesn't matter. If you're not good at any one of those things, you can't have confidence in it. Can you point to poor drafting, poor development? Probably. Do we know which one it is for sure? No, but I think we can all agree one of them's doing poorly because look at what's been going on. So, yeah, because I'm a fan of, let's take a pretty good goalie in the second or third round with the abundance of picks this year, but even now I'm gun shy on that.
I think the one takeaway that really made me feel better about it, if the Red Wings do take the swing, or whatever team takes the swing, and this is something that makes a lot of sense to me, is the conversation about contracts and how, there's a lot of information still undiscovered about goalies at the scouting level, but even in how you fit them into the modern salary cap, and that's still working its way in. It's kind of lagging behind, proper valuations for skaters. But yeah, if goalie contracts become a lot more reasonable and GMs become a lot better at assessing that, and pro scouts become a lot better at assessing what goalies are worth it, then you don't have to be so afraid of the Carey Price contract, the Sergei Bobrovsky contract. Also, again, bringing up the Connor Hellebuck contract, you bring up, the aggressive early contract to try to mitigate a higher future deal. I'm not so concerned about the timeline of a goalie's viability. So for me, that was I don't want to make it a for and against. I don't really think it's a push-pull kind of thing. I think it's just really, really complicated. But that was one that kind of dissuaded a lot of very prevalent fears for people who are worried about drafting a top goalie and then paying them a lot of money real soon.
Yeah, my ultimate takeaway was, if the Red Wings draft Wallstedt, there is a path for that to be very successful, and a more likely path than I would have thought, given how young goalies and how you can handle them, or how young goalies can pan out and how you handle them. But where it pulled me back was, are the Red Wings the team to do that?
The final thought on this before moving on here, is that part of the contract talk, one thing we're missing is Steve Yzerman's the GM of the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's not even I'm not even joking and memeing how we would say oh, he can do no wrong. No, legitimately, Steve Yzerman is known for getting the most team friendly contracts possible, to the point where it pisses off other fans. We have been other fans multiple times. We've been hurt by the late Ken Holland era UFA contracts, and I think we carry a lot of that anxiety with us, but I don't see Steve Yzerman mismanaging an asset if a goalie is a top-end goalie. Anyways, nice little cushion to fall on. Updates from across the NHL. Montreal up 3-0 against Winnipeg, like we mentioned. You know what? Good for them. Like I said before, unironically, all the credit to Carey Price, Ducharme for his coaching abilities. Yes, they've run into, well, I don't think the Leafs were an easy team to beat, first of all. I don't think that was an easy draw. And even if Winnipeg wasn't the most strong second round opponent, they just beat Edmonton. And that they have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, so good for them. If they're going to have a very tough draw in the second round. Speaking of which, the Avalanche and the Golden Knights are tied 1-1 as we record at the end of the first. Colorado's up 2-1 in that series. Islanders and Bruins, which is a fantastic series, is tied 2-2. And then Tampa Bay, Carolina, which again, another phenomenal series. Tampa Bay is up 3-1 there, which is good for Red Wings fans on paper, but emotionally maybe not. 3 of these series are excellent. The Canadian Division Series, honestly, to me, is the least fun hockey to watch of the 4.
Take out the games 5, 6, and 7 from Toronto, Montreal, the entire North Division playoffs have sucked. Like, Winnipeg's on the verge of getting swept, so there's not much of a competition here. Winnipeg swept Edmonton in the first round. Now that had a handful of overtime games, which made it a little more fun. But again, in a sweep, you have those high drama moments, but you don't have those super high drama games. The first 4 games of the Montreal Toronto series were terrible. Thankfully, those last 3 made up for it. But yeah, I was of the mindset all year that the North Division wasn't the weakest division in the NHL. I thought the Central was, just because of how bad the bottom of that division was. I apologize to everybody I argued with on that point. I concede you were all right. Yes, the North is by far the weakest division this year. And just the quality of the hockey in the playoffs proves it. The one team that I thought we all could agree was very good in that division went out in the first round. And the quality of hockey has been garbage. Meanwhile, Carolina, Nashville, Tampa, Florida and now Carolina, Tampa Bay are giving us some of the best hockey we've seen in a long, long time outside of Colorado, Vegas, because that's just pure cocaine for your eyeballs. Yeah. I was 1,000% wrong. That division was a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I was watching and I was like, I cannot believe that that's the crowd that had the right take in the end. And not like no insult. I just thought I thought it was simple and reductive, but it turns out, hey, at least by what we can see so far, it was true. IIHF World Championship. It's not always the most fun tournament to talk about. I personally am not a huge fan, especially in years like this where you don't get a lot of NHLers going, but it is fun because the Red Wings have a couple players there that were noteworthy in Troy Stecher and Moritz Seider. Moritz Seider and the Germans ultimately failing in the semis and then losing the bronze medal game. But Moritz Seider was named to the All-Star tournament, or the tournament All-Star team, I should say, which is a big accomplishment. Canada and Troy Stecher ended up taking gold, being the first team to ever lose 3 games.
Its first three games of the tournament.
Yeah. And then I think they lost 4 games overall and they still won.
It's not just that they lost the first 3 games of the tournament. I mean, they lost to the States, but they didn't just lose to the States. They got stomped by the States. It was 5-1 or something like that. And then their other 2 losses, and with all due respect to Mo Seider, their other 2 losses were Germany and Latvia. We assumed their tournament was done. And then it came down to the last day of the round robin, and Team Canada needed 1 billion results to go exactly their way just to get in the quarterfinals. And all the games that day broke the exact way Canada needed to get in the quarterfinals. And then they beat Russia in overtime. Overtime goal, possibly the goal of the tournament. Troy Stecher going between his own legs.
Oh my God.
Unbelievable.
Filthy.
Goal of the tournament. Unbelievable. And then they beat the States in the semis, and then they beat the Finns in overtime to win the tournament. Now, it's easy to say Canada winning a gold medal isn't that crazy. and in history it's not. The tournament MVP was from Team Canada and was Andrew Mangiapane. Like, that's the quality of player Team Canada had. One of their two leading defensemen for ice time was Troy Stetcher and Owen Power. And they still won the gold. It was crazy. This tournament was the ultimate silly season. Just Kazakhstan winning games, Latvia beating Canada, Canada still winning the gold, Germany going to the bronze medal game, a 20-year-old defenseman making the all-star team. Like, just nuts.
In fairness, I think the States and a lot of other teams had the same level of, we don't have guys coming. Like, Abdelkader was the captain of the States.
No, yeah. It was, like, it's not like Canada showed up and dummied them. Like, the European countries had better turnout from their most prominent players, but obviously their most prominent players aren't Sidney Crosby, Dylan Larkin, et cetera. So it was a very overall evenly matched tournament, and it produced the chaos that you would have hoped looking at those rosters.
Yeah, ultimately we got fun hockey, which was a good takeaway. Okay, I know, Brad, you want to litigate the Scheifele hit, but we don't have time for that today, maybe in a future episode. What we do have time for is our NHL draft prospect profile, who on this episode will be, we're going to get away from the top 10 here, Samu Tuomaala from Karpat in Finland. The smallish, speedy winger. Brad, take us away.
Timu Polkinen 2.0. Just kidding. Kind of. So this guy is a late first to mid second round projection on most of the rankings I've seen. And I know we've had many conversations in previous years about draft philosophy when you get deeper into the draft. And my philosophy has always been, look for a trait. Look for something special in a prospect this late, because you don't find that all that often, and then build around it. You can teach certain players certain parts of the game if they have a natural ability that you can use consistently and offensively. In this case, for Tuomaala, it's his shot. Shooters shoot, and this guy is amongst the best in the draft. And he's a righty too, which, if you want to make that specific note for the Red Wings, he's a small right-handed shot, lethal shooter, quick release. He's a great puck handler, great skater. Right now, his issue seems to be he lacks the top gear that it looks like he should have. He doesn't drive the middle enough. He sometimes plays too passive of a game, and he tends to get trapped on the perimeter. Now, you can play on the perimeter, especially if you have his shot, if you also are a really good playmaker. And he's got good passing ability, but obviously that's not the strength of his game, and it's not good enough for him to solely live on the perimeter. Like a guy like Jonathan Berggren, his playmaking ability is so elite. If he never goes to the middle of the ice, he's still going to have a positive impact on the game. That's not Tuomaala. He can score from there, and he can make some good passes from there, but he really, really needs to get that extra drive to his game. But here's the thing. That's just a mentality thing. You can coach that. These are the things I look for. He's got good speed. He's aggressive when he has the puck. He has great hands and an unbelievable shot. For someone who's probably not going until the second round, that is a hell of a starting point for a prospect. So I'm not saying everything is going to go right for him, especially at 5'10", 5'11", however tall he is. But if you want to take a swing on a guy later in the draft, this is a prime target.
Yeah, I think that last point you made is really what makes it more attractive for me, is that I don't view him as a 23rd overall pick. I'm not confident enough really to place him there quite yet. I know you might have him closer to that range, but if you start looking at this guy as a second round pick, yeah, like you have that kind of shot and that ability to snipe, and you've demonstrated that kind of speed and skating ability. Those two things alone make you a very, very attractive second round pick, not to count the rest of your game. The interesting part about Tuomaala for me is that parts of his game that have been criticized, people say the defensive effort, I can see that. I can see it. But then also, if you look at different, viewings, or you look at different scouting reports, that seems to be something that wasn't an issue before. Or, the effort part of it, it's not that he's lazy or like a bum, but doesn't always use his top speed or his top gear that he's displayed before. It's just a little funny that sometimes he doesn't put it all together. And I don't quite know what to make of it. But you're right, Brad. If that's something that can just be coached, then that is your opportunity to find really good value much lower than you probably should have. He's an attractive prospect for me. If two of your really, really good traits are your shooting and your skating, and some of your other traits are very coachable, or just, you have to work into the right system, or you're just like, again, he's a kid, right? He's 5'10", 174. That's literally my size. He builds his frame a little better. He, grows into a man, solidifies, plays pro hockey, plays against like grown men a little bit more. I think he had a short stint in Liga this year. Yeah, I'm not going to say 100%. Like, we're not talking about a top 10 draft pick here, but that could be something that lands in the second round. I don't think I'll have the confidence to take him in the first round if I'm Detroit with that second pick that they have. But second round, I'll definitely start to look at him.
Well, you look at where would a guy like this slot into your lineup and how comfortable do I think he's going to be a top 6 forward in the NHL? Probably not. He could be a guy that like spot fills for injuries and probably be able to do it competently. But he's probably a guy who can bring a lot of energy and scoring depth when he gets really going on your third line. But his shot's good enough. He can play the left half wall on either of your power play units. Like, we talked Michael Rasmussen when we drafted him. Hey, the guy's probably a third liner, but he could be an elite weapon on your power play. We were saying that about a guy that we picked at 9th overall. Now, that wasn't a great pick, but still, that was the scouting report. Now we're saying about the same thing about a guy who could go in the second round. So, not saying if he is my pick at 23 or 38 or whatever their second round pick is, but if he's still there at 38, he's got to be very, very high on my list at that point.
Kind of seems like people have him at the later, like the 20 and up, and then somewhere into the second round, out of people's consensus rankings or whatever you want to call them. Yeah, he looks like he's a guy who just shoots in volume. So I guess that's never really a bad thing to have. People were making notes of his work ethic, which there's the Steve Yzerman trait right there. He looks like an interesting prospect. I think you'd probably hope like he could play a third line scoring winger, that maybe if all the stars aligned, he could play a second wing or a second line wing. Yeah, I like him just for all the things you guys said. But everyone says he's got decent skating, needs some work defensively, good shot, good elusive shot. So, I mean, if you get a guy like that in the second round at some point, that seems like a great value pick.
And for what it's worth, and I should start doing this more, it'll be a little more relevant once we get outside the top 10, but I keep an aggregate of rankings going where I take the rankings from 7 or 8 different high-profile ranking sites and people and average them out. So right now, for what it's worth, Tuomaala falls 34th on that aggregate ranking. So that will kind of give you an idea of his range. And I'll remind me to keep you guys updated on that every time we do a prospect profile who's not a top 10 pick. So it gives you guys a little better context.
The only slight concern I have, well, it's not really a concern. He only played 5 games in the Finnish, what's their top league? SM Liga or something like that.
Liga, yeah.
And he had no points at all. So, if you're going to be, he's still ultra young, so I'm not totally worried about that, but putting up donuts isn't the greatest thing of all time. Very small gripe.
All right. Samu Tuomaala, that is his quick prospect profile for today. Again, we're going to be pumping these out pretty much every episode leading up until the draft. I'll start posting them again individually on YouTube as well on its own playlist. Okay, let's jump into overtime here. We have a few questions to get through. We're going to start out with our Patreon supporters because they are incredible people and we love them dearly and they deserve all the nice things in the world. Starting with Clint Benish says, we're moving due to a new job and there's no hockey leagues for my son to play in. Yay, middle of Illinois. Son wants to keep playing and the only option is roller hockey but no leagues. Question, I'm looking for a solid goal that won't break the bank. I saw the easy goal on Pure Hockey with the backdrop. If you had any experience with that setup, what do you suggest? Also pucks or balls for asphalt play?
Don't use rubber pucks on asphalt. They will slide for garbage. For asphalt, you probably want a green biscuit for slide. Get the green biscuit snipe if he's going to be shooting it a lot. The nets are a dime a dozen. Just get something with at least a 1.5 inch metal pipe or else it's just going to blow up on you.
Terry Driver of Crying Ryan Hannah's Banana Slamma Jamathong says, bring me Nolan Patrick. That is, I think, my favorite name so far just because it's so fun to say. Nolan Patrick, that is. Ryan Hubbard says, what do you think was Ken Holland's biggest regret as Wings GM? I would say the Weiss contract. I'll go Abby here.
Man. Yeah. It's depressing how many things are running through my mind right now, how many options. I'm going to say the Michael Rasmussen pick. That one really, really did not work out. Not that Rasmussen's a bad player. We've talked ad nauseum about it, but watching what Nick Suzuki is doing for Montreal in the playoffs right now and what Marty Necas is doing for Carolina is depressing the ever-living hell out of me.
And then also says, love the content, really looking forward to Sundays and Wednesdays. When do you think it's realistic to think about you three being back in the studio again? Maybe the fall. We'll see how things go here.
For whatever it's worth, my second vaccine appointment is booked for September 7th. So we'll put that as a rough timeline.
Yeah. The issue is, much like when I say or tweet anything about hockey, the opposite comes true the moment I put it on record. So I don't want to say a date and get too excited.
See, right now I feel like a Leaf fan because we're seeing all the daily cases in Ontario and they're plummeting in our region. They're plummeting and we see the vaccination rates. But in the back of our minds, we're just waiting for whatever the hell it is that's going to cause the implosion.
Next comments from Ryan say, come Rocket. Sorry, because that is a crypto token and you're killing me inside, Brendan. If you could be guaranteed Shane Wright or whichever pick you wanted, but the stipulation is you have to trade them. They can't play a game in the NHL with your franchise, or you could keep him and for the next 20 years, you may not draft in the first round. What would you choose? Oh, definitely the pick and trade.
Oh, 1,000%. You would get a king's ransom for him. Everybody always forgets. Like, obviously, the Flyers traded for Eric Lindros, and he never played a game for the Nordiques. And Lindros turned out to be a Hall of Famer, so people remember that. The Nordiques got a haul for him that directly led to multiple Stanley Cups, including Peter Forsberg. So, yeah, I would much rather do that.
Scott Martin said, and then he says crypto to the moon. Scott Martin says, honest question, do you think it's better to be in a situation like ours, having a near blank slate to build a future team with, or a situation like Toronto/Buffalo, having elite talents but still not being able to get past certain barriers year after year? Okay, I'll say I would prefer our situation to Buffalo's, even though they might have better higher end pieces with Dahlin and Eichel. That there's something about that team that's just not working. I would prefer Toronto's situation. Granted, Toronto has this thing where they can't capitalize on their own talent, but they have a lot of good young talent with a lot of time still left in the window. And the cap isn't pretty, but it's manageable, especially with who they have locked down.
Well, it's a tough question because are we talking about just the players involved or are we talking about the entire organization? Because right now, the Red Wings don't have an Austin Matthews. They don't have a Mitch Marner. They don't have a Jack Eichel. They don't have a Rasmus Dahlin. So if we're just looking at rosters, I would take either of them. And I think Detroit's prospects pool is better than Buffalo, but we don't have an Eichel or a Dahlin, and that would be a hell of a starting point. But if you're factoring in the entire organization, yes, obviously I prefer us over Buffalo.
Deathman6452 says, hey there, Dub boys. All I can say about the lottery is at least we didn't go down. With the expansion, do you see Yzerman making any 4D chess moves to get more picks for this year or next year? Or should we simmer on any big moves till next year since we already have 12? Keep up the great content, boys, and pour one out for our boy Steve Dangle. I think the best approach is to hope for it and know that that's something that Yzerman's going to be working for. But the NHL inherently is unfun, so the chances are arbitrarily low.
He's gonna try.
Yeah, that's the best you can do. Ruthless and Toothless says, let me preface this by saying I'm not complaining, and I wouldn't change anything, but if the Caps were able to give Mantha top 6 minutes, why couldn't they have given Vrana the same? Laviolette and Vrana had a falling out, from what I can understand. They really didn't see eye to eye.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for that because all the analytics said, hey, once this guy's going to get more ice time, he's going to score like a fiend. And then he got to Detroit and they gave him ice time, mostly. And he scored like a fiend. So, yeah, I don't know.
Alan Snyder says, my NHL draft has the Red Wings taking Wallstedt at 6 and Kosa at 23. Maybe in 5 years we can have two of the highest paid goalies in the league. Yeah, just $20 million in goalies. Let's do it.
Listen, I understand the arguments for Wallstedt at 6. I'm on record as saying I wouldn't do it, but I fully get it. If you're advocating for Wallstedt and Kosa, share whatever you're taking because I could use whatever pick-me-up from this miserable life that you are getting.
Josh Brink says, what's the worst playoff series you can remember watching? I think this Habs-Jet series is up there for me, but I think it's probably the Ducks-Devils Cup final in 2003. Oh, that was a particularly bad series.
Oh, that was terrible. Kings-Devils wasn't that far behind. God, all the truly bad series come before the Stanley Cup finals, though, and the immediate one that jumps to mind for me, I can't remember if it was 2008 or 2009, but the Rangers-Thrashers. Where everybody was all excited Atlanta finally got to the playoffs, and then the Rangers just laid waste to them. At no point was Atlanta competitive in that series.
I also hated the Penguins Sharks just because I knew what was going to happen the whole time.
Honestly. Yeah.
Beer League Participation Trophy says, as if being a Red Wings fan wasn't hard enough because of this shit show of a podcast, you all have my dumbass waking up on a Sunday morning to watch Formula One, but oh my god, Baku is hell of a drug. I'll tell you, any of you suckers that because Brad and Evan, I still haven't convinced, tricked into watching Formula One with the rest of us, this weekend was an insane race. Just the writers, if they wrote this script, it would have been rejected because they would have been like, no, this is too far fetched. Baku is a city in Azerbaijan. Brad, it's the capital. That's where they raced today.
Okay. I don't.
You had your confused face on, so I thought I would explain it to you. Hockey is gross now because I'm rooting for the Habs and Avs, and I feel disgusting. At least with Washington, we can hope for Boston to get Furked, which is my current North Star. Good to see Rossi skating again. Can't wait for NBC to lose their rights, and excited to draft our franchise goaltender here in a few weeks. As good as it gets says, do you think Chelios could make the current Wings at 59 years old? Saw him sitting behind the plate at a Cubs game the other day, and he doesn't look like he is aged. I mean...
Yeah, but that's more a testament to the Red Wings than it is Chris Chelios.
Yeah. Kyle Hashman says, not sure what happened. There's something wrong with the comment. Says, Price. It was a comment about Price in making it worth the $10 million in the playoffs, putting up a $950 right now before Game 3, which is insane.
Yep. The Montreal Canadiens are playing great hockey at the right time. Carey Price is playing out of his mind, and they're still not going to win the Stanley Cup.
And then the real question is, who is available at pick 6 in 21 and 22? Any idea of those guys, Brad? Some names to throw out there.
For what, sorry?
Pick 6 in 2021 and 2022.
2022 I don't have, but on my rankings for 2021 at 6th, I have Kent Johnson. So there you go.
Unless he meant next season, in which case I'm sorry, Kyle. Andrew Bohan says, hello, lovely dub boys. Canada being Canada late in a tournament, eh? Also, LOL, Seb Vettel and Pierre Gasly go brr. Again, you guys should really watch F1. Lars, the prophet of the towering behemoth, says 27 degrees in the shade here in Ledscar outside Skarplinge in the municipality of Tierp in Uppsala, in Sweden. I was out mowing the lawn and the sweat was running down my back and soaking Death Valley. I had this idea pop back into my head. How about a summer competition where followers take pictures of themselves in Winged Wheel podcast gear and hashtag WWP on tour, and a jury of our peers will select a winner? That would make for awesome summer content and fun. That would be a really cool thing to
God, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be so fun. Do it. It's happening. It's on.
Also, power has been absolutely awesome in the Worlds. As I write this, a final, my Finnish brothers will win 4-1. Oh, well, that didn't age well. Sorry, Lars. Sam W says it's not necessarily popular, but what would you trade up, or who would you trade up with for our Washington pick if they fell to, say, 20?
Lots of players. It just depends who realistically has a chance to fall. Like, for example, without giving away my whole list before I post it, I have Logan Stankoven at 13 on my list. I will bet Logan Stankoven, not bet, but there's a really goddamn good chance he just makes it to 23. So I don't think I would trade up. I would look at the guys from my second tier. So if, a guy like Lucelle fell, then that's when I start considering trading up. But then my next tier almost makes it to 23. So in my mind, there's no point trading up then.
Gerald McDonald says, hey guys, camp was canceled last year due to COVID. Will this year's camp have more players than usual since the wing staff wasn't able to get a close view on them previously? I'm fully confident that the Wings will invite as many players as they are allowed to. It's just dependent on where the world is at that point.
Yeah, as they are allowed to is going to be the key point.
Aaron Hudson says, hey boys, would you be happy if the Wings came out of the first round with Mason, McTavish, and Stankoven? The need at center is a big one for me.
Thrilled.
That'd be a nice haul. I know Evan's a big McTavish guy, so I know he'd be happy with that pick.
Absolutely.
He's in my top 10, so he's not far off.
Justin and the Angry Mob says, hey fellas, with Zadina's ELC wrapping up after next season, do you think both sides will come together on a bridge or something longer? And what should we hope for in terms of term and value? I'll hang up and listen. I wouldn't hate an aggressive long-term contract for Zadina because I think Yzerman could get it pretty cheap, but I think Zadina will want a bridge, and that will be perfectly amenable to the team as well because Zadina hasn't exactly blown up, but he hasn't looked terrible either, so it works for both sides.
All the signs of a guy who's about to have his coming out party were there for Zadina last year. Some bad luck, a low shooting percentage, and a shitty supporting cast around him were all factors in why he didn't put up more points. So all those things are going to improve. And the foundations of his game were very, very, very good. So yeah, I think Zadina's crazy if he doesn't push for a bridge.
Blue says, hey boys, hope the weekend's treating you well. Sounds like Vince Dunn will probably be moved before the expansion draft. He's young and a left side D. Do you think the Wings should look into cashing in a bit of their accumulated draft capital to make a run? Seems like he'd fit the window when they expect to be back in playoff contention. Same question for Ryan Graves if Colorado chooses to move him before expansion. If yes, what do you think it would take to get the deal done?
I don't think Colorado is going to let go of Graves, so I'm going to look up Vince Dunn. He will be 25 very early into next season, so that is a pass for me.
You think 25 is too late?
To give up assets for? Yeah, if St. Louis is like, we just need to get rid of this guy, we'll take a third. Of course, you'd be crazy to not do it, but I don't think that's going to be the price for Vince Dunn.
Read around Baldwin, shoving it in since 1984, says, so this garbage hockey team Montreal, what's the deal? The deal is they're playing good playoff hockey. They're playing better than the sum of their parts. They deserve credit, and Carey Price is on a different level.
I read a stat today that was Montreal's been on the penalty kill 29 times. They've given up 3 goals and have scored 3 shorthanded.
They are even.
That's a heater.
That is unreal. And Montreal as a team isn't that good, but their penalty kill, chef's kiss. It is aggressive. They are always in attack mentality, and they cover a lot of the defensive zone very quickly. Every team should look at Montreal's penalty kill and just go, yeah, we're going to do that.
Getting dusted by 5-year-old on skates says, I'll get a lot of flack for this, having not watched any racing since Dale Sr. died, but what are the differences between Indy and F1? I see F1 talked about in the Discord, and why should anyone not root for Hamilton? Seems like he's almost automatic, or maybe Verstappen. I don't know a lot about IndyCar. F1 is supposed to be like the premier, like fastest race, but the fans of IndyCar that I know think it's really good too. Someone better qualified in the Discord can tell you about it. Hamilton and Verstappen. Hamilton is arguably the GOAT up there with Schumacher, but he's like late 30s, but still, he's basically LeBron every time LeBron comes out with another prime, like at age 36, this year notwithstanding. And people hate on him because they're tired of him winning, which I honestly understand. Verstappen is 23 and already one of the best talents ever. So yeah. Slava Kozlov's doppelganger says, as I mentioned on Twitter, all my posts are Jesper Wallstedt propaganda. First off, as my meme said, 6 overall Wallstedt is a reality, Brad. Not a dream, a reality. Ryan, as my vessel for convincing Brad, show this injury-prone friend of ours why Wallstedt is my love and my life. Even if he doesn't agree, my point is moot and life is meaningless. Or if Evan doesn't agree, my point is moot and meaningless. Where are you on the Wallstedt? Yes or no, like black or white? Where are you on Wallstedt right now, Evan?
Like taking him at 6?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to explain. It's just yes or no.
No.
Thank you.
All right. I thought we were friends. Evan Beckner says, who's the bigger waste of the sport's greatest player? McDavid in Edmonton or Trout in Anaheim?
Trout in Anaheim.
1,000% Mike Trout. They have Shohei Ohtani as well, and they're below 500. I don't know enough about baseball to get into the nitty gritty of it, but if you have Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani and you are below 500, everybody in that organization needs to be fired.
Yeah. The part that made me sad was seeing the statistics on how Mike Trout might actually finish as the greatest baseball player of all time by the numbers.
And he might never play another baseball game. Or another playoff baseball game.
I was like, what happened?
Devastating injury happened 2 minutes ago.
Rick Choate says, if Buffalo takes Powers, does he stay at Michigan, or are they going to rush him to the NHL to appease Jack Eichel?
Do you keep saying Powers?
They wrote Powers, and I read it out because I'm a dummy, but I didn't correct it because I can't parse it.
That's the second time I've heard it this episode. I'm like, is he doing this on purpose just to test me?
I will do it quite a bit because I keep reading what people say. I know it's, anyways.
Okay. If there's any team that will rush him, it's Buffalo.
Canceller of podcasts is G'day Dud Duds. I noticed Brad, Chief Dummy, fell into the trap of reading into something Steve Yzerman said after Steve Yzerman specifically said I wouldn't read into anything I say. I'm going to assume it may have had something to do from minor blood loss trying to sever a finger and get workers' comp and not having to work anymore. We're on to you. After watching some of the post-regular season exhibition games, there's something very unsettling and jarring about the Tampa Bay cap circumventions just slapping around a team wearing red and white with a certain Czech netminder. I feel like this is undoing years of therapy. Wow. Way to project it. I wasn't thinking about it that way.
Shit.
Jersey time. Noted fun hater and bad opinion man Bradley John Crisco was wrong last week when he said he didn't like the Snow Wave team's blue pants. No rebuttals will be taken at this time. Best round 2 Jersey matchups. Go. Round 2 Jersey matchups.
Hold on. I actually
no rebuttals taken at this time.
I'm not arguing the point. I'm just saying I thought I was in the majority opinion on that, and I will actually be surprised if I'm not based on what my timeline has said about them.
Let this be known that it is stricken from the record of this podcast. I think Avs and Golden Knights are the best second round Jersey matchup. Honorable mention here to Montreal, Winnipeg, if we had to pick another one, in my mind.
Nah, it would be Colorado, Vegas running away if it wasn't for that blue equipment, but it still wins.
Stay Fresh Cheese Bags says this post is brought to you by Stay Fresh Cheese Bags, a Fournier company. Stay Fresh Cheese Bags. When Pierre Maguire starts talking, slip one over your head and relax into the sweet release from consciousness. Seriously, I get so angry when he starts talking. I want to punch him in his stupid Melvin face. Your top 5 worst Pierre moments go. You don't need 5. You need 1. It's Can You Believe It?
Can you believe it?
I can.
One of the greatest moments in Canadian hockey history, and he ruins it. Well, not ruins it, but he ruins it. Someone literally made a variation of that on YouTube where they just muted Pierre's mic for the entirety of the call, and it might be the single greatest moment in hockey history. It is so good. I don't know. There's the one about Phil Kessel's breath.
I don't want to give up anything more than a third and a low tier prospect for Nolan Patrick. Any package with Hronek is already too much. Nolan needs time off to heal his lingering concussion issues. Brad, call me crazy, but I'm really leaning towards McTavish at 6 over the likes of Eklund, Johnson, and Clark. Am I crazy? Thoughts?
Not crazy. If those 3 that you mentioned specifically are gone by pick 6, I would very seriously consider McTavish. But yeah, no, if Eklund, Clark, and Johnson are there, I would not take McTavish.
AJ Voss says watching Mrazek follow up a 946 save percentage game with a 769 one really took me back. I was pissed when we moved on, but it's worked out well. Are there any past moves like that when you were pissed when it happened, but then it largely ended up being fine? I mean, yeah, everything that's happened during the rebuild pretty much. Every player that the Red Wings have lost has been okay.
The Athanasiou trade mostly for me.
Yeah.
That one has gone far better than I thought. And that's even with like Athanasiou bouncing back this year with LA. So that's kind of everybody wins except Edmonton.
Reed also says, how much did Gallant's coaching figure into Canada's win at the World Championship? So what are the implications for his potential return? I think anytime you have a group of players who don't always play together, the coach does play a big role. And he did earn himself a lot of brownie points for teams who are looking for a coach. Logan Couture's broken ankle says Nolan Patrick for the Rangers' second round pick that Detroit owns. Yeah, if Philly wanted to take that, I'd gladly do it. I don't think they will.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. Nolan Patrick's already an NHL player. I mean, what's that pick? 48th. So that's like a 40% chance you get a half decent NHLer out of that pick. Yeah, I make that trade.
Tyler C says, do you have any players on the do not draft list after seeing Barons flop like a soccer player in the U18s? I really hope he's not a Wings pick.
You know how Yzerman loves his character guys, but I do like Barons. I don't really have anybody on my do not draft list, at least nobody that I've done any research on, which is in my top 60-ish guys right now. The only reason anybody would end up on my do not draft list is if they have some major, very public character flaws. I can't even remember his name, but that douche nozzle that the Coyotes took last year.
Time for a couple Reddit questions. I'm sorry we ran long here. T44T says, who do you think Sider's competition is for the Calder next year?
He doesn't have any.
Quentin Byfield, maybe, if he breaks in with LA.
Yeah, Byfield's LA is probably going to have 4 guys in contention if we're being honest here.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced anybody from this draft plays. So who else has been drafted and hasn't? Cole Caulfield will be eligible now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
And there are a bunch of good questions here. Please feel free to ask them again next episode. I apologize, but we're going to take one more here from Elamer. It says, hey, from Germany, I started listening to the pod when the Wings drafted Sider and stayed for the quality content. I listened back and I was pleasantly surprised about how much more upbeat and happy you all sounded at the beginning of this when the show started. And you had some freezing cold takes. Favorite was probably Brad saying the only reason I'd be remotely okay with Babcock leaving is Blashill. He also wanted Holland to go all in on the 2016 class. His favorite was Okposo, if not Ladd, or Eriksson, who's so good. I love Louis Eriksson. He's so underrated. Ryan thought the Abbey contract wasn't all that bad, and Evan never had a bad opinion in his life, obviously. So the one thing to say here is the upbeat thing was funny because at the time, when we first started out the podcast and we had a very small following, and obviously we wanted to make sure that this show stuck on, we took a lot of flack for saying that the rebuild should start sooner.
Yeah, we were too negative. That was our biggest criticism. We were more upbeat then. As you said, we were more upbeat, which had us have a better outlook, and we were more positive about things. And that's when we had all our worst takes. So the lesson to be taken here is pessimism is truth. Welcome to the rebuild.
I will never get over trying to defend the Abdelkader and even De Keyser contracts. Those are my two worst takes of my life. I am ashamed of it, but hey, nobody's perfect.
Oh my God. I'll never, ever forgive myself for that 2016 free agency because I still remember clearly for months leading up to it, our only thought on that free agency was Stamkos. Shit, he re-signed in Tampa. Who the fuck else is available? Oh yeah, these guys are pretty good. Like quickly looking at the numbers. Oh, he's all right. And it turned out to be the worst day of free agency in NHL history. So yeah, that shit show.
All right, we do have to wrap up this episode. We'll see you guys again midweek, hopefully with a very fun little surprise next episode. For now, we'd like to thank all of our name-level sponsors, Arjun Shankar, say hi to your mom, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Brett Bailey, Terry Driver of Crying Ryan Hannah's Banana Slamma Jamathong, Taylor Tadgel, Brendan M, Citizen High Five, Craig Kibble, Greach, Han Ali, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jacob Turner, Jake Kiefer, Jeremiah Dobo, Joe Santangelo, Justin, and the Angry Mob, brand new name-level sponsor. Welcome, Justin. Kaylin Wood, Cody Stark, Kyle Hashman, Kyle McClure, Matt McKay, Matthew M. Rice, R.A., Ryan Hubbard, Ryan Say, that crypto token, Scott Martin, Zach Spring, Andrew Bohan, Sam Bankson, Adam, I wish I could finish like Ernie, another former junior goalie turned golfer, Antonio Gracias, cautiously pessimistic, fine, Crisco, not betting on it, Connor Leighton, Dave W., Evans Bingo Card, Jeremy Brocker, John Evans, Joseph Minama, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Matt Keeler, As Good As It Gets, Reed, the Read Around Baldwin, shoving it in since 1984, Stan Olson, Stay Fresh Cheese Bags, Trevor Pevavar. Thank you all so much. See you midweek.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.